Right, hello. My name is Charlie Tripp, and in my year as president of the Mathematical Association, I've been having some kind of discussions, video discussions with various people who are expert in maths education or have a prominent position in education and can really sort of, I suppose, I'm trying to tackle some of the or think about some of the issues involved in maths education, how we might overcome them, and particular focus that I've got for today's discussion is on SEN, special educational needs, and I, it's something that when I was teaching, I was never very confident about special educational needs in maths. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but I also know that many teachers of maths feel similarly. And so the person I've got with me today is a gentleman called Nick Sheffield, and Nick has been as a teacher and a senior leader in school. He was always involved in SEN, and he now works in the London Borough of Southwark as a autism support in the autism support team. But he also is part of the expert Rochefort review team on SEN. He's the author of a special, or in fact, he's about to be the author of a soon to be published special school wisdom for mainstream teachers with a co-author called Mike Fleeton. So he's somebody who's a real expert in SEN, and he's been giving a bit of thought to SEN in the context of maths, particularly because he's a member of the strategic board of one of the maths hubs in London. So Nick, if I hand over to you, perhaps you can say a little bit about yourself as well, and then I'll go on and we can have a more in-depth discussion. So Nick.
Hello, Charlie. Just absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all about maths. We never really get to talk about maths in SEN, so I'm really excited to have this opportunity.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, the sort of points I want to cover in this discussion, what I want to focus on is on maths education for children who really do find maths challenging, and how we can help them to develop the maths knowledge and skills effectively. I know that being able to use maths is so important to everybody, and so it's something that we really want to try and make sure we get right. And I know that through the work of the NCTM and the maths hubs, I know that SEN it occurs in two settings in our education system. There are SEN special schools, and there are also children in mainstream schools with SEN. We want to try and think about how we can do the best by all of those children through their maths education. And both those settings participate in NCTM Maths Hub work. We try to have the teachers from both settings working together as part of what we do, but we also have a separate community for the SEN special school people to be able to network as well. But I know that many maths teachers aren't confident with how to support SEN in maths. I know I wasn't. I quite often hear from people who say that they're not confident with it, but people we really do want to do this and want to do it well. And so, knowing that you're on a strategic board for Maths Hub, I thought what I'd do is a bit of role play perhaps, and I'll say that as a member of a strategic board of Maths Hub, I hear a lot from teachers and from parents, that SEN is something that people are concerned about in maths. And what I'd really like to be able to do is to be able to work with teachers of maths in this Maths Hub region, in my Maths Hub region, if you like, to be able to provide the best possible support to improve how we can help SEN children with maths. So that's a big brief, Nick, but kind of over to you. What do you think?
Maths is it's such a fantastic subject to teach, but it's also such a challenging one if you don't know what you're teaching. I think back to my first ever maths lesson I taught. I qualified as a PE teacher. I went into SEN, had a PMLD class, so profound multiple learning disabilities, and I was given a load of ducks and a load of yellow paint, and I was off go teaching five little ducks. And I remember thinking, is that maths? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's maths. And so it's that kind of curiosity really sparked something in me to learn more about it. I think children do find maths difficult who have special educational needs because it can be quite an abstract concept, and it should be very knowledge based. And I think sometimes as educators, when we're working with children with special educational needs, whatever setting it may be, we lean towards the skill and not the knowledge. We all have those children who can count to 20, but if I put five balls in front of you and say, give me three, they can't do it. So they haven't applied the skill to the knowledge. And it's that child who can post all the shapes into the boxes and can do all that sort of stuff, but actually give me a triangle. They can't give me a triangle because they don't actually understand the triangleness of a triangle, the 3 points of a triangle, the shape, the being of a triangle. And it's tempting to focus on skills because they're easier to impart.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to teach a skill than it is to teach a knowledge, especially something that's abstract like maths can be. So we tend to make maths a bit too quick and a bit too kind of tick boxy, and that all comes from a good place. We want to see progress. We want to see children moving through a curriculum, especially if we're maybe behind, and we see those gaps and we try to fill those gaps. But we need to take our time and really explore the number, the shape, the concepts in a really in-depth way.
You know, it's really interesting that you're saying this because one of the things that the NCCM and the Maths Hubs are doing is this teaching for mastery pedagogy and the idea
Mm.
of developing a deep and connected understanding of maths. And that isn't the same as being able to get the questions right. And we're not in I suppose my maths teaching at all levels. You can kind of yeah, you can pretend or you can convince yourself that if you can get a whole sort of exercise book full of ticks, that therefore
Yeah.
you're teaching effectively. And it seems to me that what you're saying about SEN is pretty similar in that respect to what can go wrong in a standard maths classroom.
Yeah, you've got to be process driven, not outcome driven, especially if your child is working with, say, a one-to-one TA, or we don't have many of those in schools anymore, but that child who's working with an adult. And if we're not careful, we lean too much into kind of extrinsic motivation, finish the task, get the reward, and then we don't have that love of maths. Everyone needs a love of maths, whether you've got special education needs or not, because maths is going to be a lifelong skill and knowledge that we're all going to need wherever we go. And that's one of the key founding principles, isn't it, that we talk
Yeah,
about. And so, how do we make maths intrinsically motivating and make children want to learn it and want to get in there and find out more, be curious about maths?
yeah. That is interesting because I know we also do but both I've got my role as chief executive of the maths education charity MEI, and also in the NCTM role we do quite a lot of work with GCSE research students.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's often happened to them is, first of all, that they may have been their experience of learning maths may have been as a kind of an ever growing set of instructions to apply to answer questions. So therefore they are really kind of not not really sort of learning properly what's going on,
Mm.
and then it becomes bewildering.
Yeah.
But also I think that there's an interesting statistic actually that I think that at key stage 4, so 13, 16 year olds, then I think the numbers are 17% of key stage 4 children have some kind of SEN designation, but of the ones that are doing GCSE reset, it's 29%, so approaching 30%. And obviously, there's a
Wow.
kind of filter, isn't there? That if you didn't get through your GCSE, then the
Yeah.
chance, you've got a greater chance of having some kind of SEM. But
Mm.
it seems to me that the way that the teaching has happened pre-16 that's resulted in that failure to achieve a grade 4, if you like,
Mm.
that is charming with what you're saying about what is sort of good SEN teaching and what perhaps is, it seems quite gratifying, and it can be rewarding in the sense of achieving some kind of outcome. But if you haven't got the develop the knowledge underneath that, then it's not really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, the older you get in education, the more you teach to the test and not teach to the knowledge, and the actual content.
Mm.
And that's the way our education system set up. But it provides a fundamental challenge to children who have got special education needs and are learning maths, because it moves very, very quickly. And
Yeah,
if you look at the mastery approach, we learn it in like 3 or 4 different ways, don't we?
yeah,
When we learn odds and evens, we learn it in all these different ways. We have all these checkpoints for, oh, that's even, that's odd. We have these checkpoints in what I would call a correspondence check. So
yeah,
we're able to kind of ratify that we know this is right because. And
yeah,
it's that we know this is right because, not because you've ticked it, but because I understand. And as we move up in education, we lose that feeling
yeah,
of, yeah, and we end up thinking we know it's right because I got a C or a
yeah.
grade 4 or
You,
whatever it might
you
be.
you just remind me of something else actually. Again, in the sort of teaching of mastery pedagogy, the idea of that there's this kind of phrase, the answer's only the beginning. So if you
Yes.
say you ask a class a question, a child gets an answer. So you might say yes, that's right, but then you might follow up with the question by saying, how did you do that, or better, ask somebody else, how do you think the other person got that answer? And then you might ask somebody else, well, why did that work? And
Mm.
so what you're doing then is you're going beyond the answer and into the knowledge and understanding. And again, it sounds like there's a parallel there.
Well, there's a reason why. If you look at the SATs papers,
Mm,
you have to show your work in. That
mm,
there's a fundamental reason. It's not there just to annoy people. It's there to demonstrate understanding of what's happened. And I think we sometimes, especially with our children who find maths difficult, we rush through the lesson and we become doers, not thinkers. And
yeah,
that can happen very, very quickly. We can kind of guesstimate our way through the lesson, get it all marked, get it all ticked off, and get to break on time.
yeah,
Or I can ask questions, I can, make sure that it's all right and I can get it wrong and I can do all that stuff, or I can copy the person next to me.
yeah,
And it's that, and it's because we teach at such a pace. And there's a theory called self-determination theory by Decky and Ryan, and it talks about confidence, competence, and autonomy.
yeah,
Do you have the confidence to try? Do you have the competence, i.e., the skills and the knowledge to give it a go and be successful? And then do you have the autonomy to do it by yourself? And do you have the reasonable, I'm going to try because I want to? And the further we get up the maths ladder, the further and further that autonomy comes away from us. And that's why, I remember, we talk about the resets of
yeah.
GCSEs, that they don't, the stats aren't great. And
No,
that's
they're
because the
terrible.
autonomy's
Yeah,
gone, because it's why am I doing this? Because I have to,
yeah. No,
and
that's right. I
not
mean,
because I want to.
yeah, I mean, of children who don't get a grade four by age 16, I think roughly 25% of them have achieved a grade four by age 19, which is a pretty shameful statistic, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Something you
exactly.
just said reminded me of something else actually that in the Far East, but which is partly where we've looked for the sort of thinking about teaching for mastery. But there's some research from it's quite old research now, but it's a guy called Akihiko Takahashi, which is a great name, isn't it? He's a Japanese researcher. Like he works in America, but he did some analysis of TIMS, so the trends in maths and science study international testing.
Okay.
And what he looked at was that there are some countries like Singapore who've covered huge amounts of the curriculum. It happens in our year five and our year nine. So there are two sort of points where TIMS happens. And he'd done some research where he was looking at for individual countries how much of the curriculum, like the TIMS curriculum, if you like, had been covered by the country at the time the children did the test, then how well
Oh,
the children done on the test.
mm,
And so Singapore, they've done loads of the curriculum, they've scored really highly. And
yeah.
then you have, say, the United States, that knows the curriculum, haven't scored so well, not nearly so
Mm,
well. We're kind of a bit similar to that.
mm,
But what he was doing was saying, look at Japan. In Japan, they've covered much less of the curriculum, but they've scored really pretty well, higher than countries that cover much more. Not as high as Singapore at that stage, but
mm,
what's happening is that they're teaching the maths much more slowly, carefully, and deeply, and that is giving those children what must be happening is that those
yeah,
children have some autonomy in the exam. They can see a question, they can think, I know some maths, I can work this out.
yeah.
It's not I never covered it directly, but I've become an autonomous mathematician, which must be a pretty good goal for maths education, mustn't it? So
Oh, yeah, because you think it's funny, we talk about kind of maths and about kind of achievable outcomes, and you talk about mastery, and it's also an understanding that mastery will look different for different children
yeah,
at different stages of their learning. So teaching mastery in a secondary environment look very different to teaching mastery in an EYFS environment.
mm,
And it's having that knowledge of a practitioner to be able to withdraw and hold back and let that child learn the
yeah,
maths. And that's always a challenge for people as well, because they're itching to impart. And actually, if you teach me, you rob me of the the opportunity to learn, is that famous phrase.
yeah,
And they've got to work it out themselves. There's got to be problem solving, and there's also understanding that kind of when in my kind of SEN background, I get asked a lot to help in curriculums and to support schools with
yeah,
curricula, and they can't. Schools want their curriculum and they want a SEN curriculum as a kind of little tag on that adds to the curriculum so that everyone's covered. When really, and that then sits with the Senko and that's their curriculum. When really, a curriculum covers everyone in the school and it's for everyone. And the people who hold that knowledge need to be the subject leaders. They need to be the curriculum designer, the quality of teaching and learning lead, whoever that might be. And they need to know how to teach every single child in the school, and for that knowledge to be shared and understood in a really practical way, that when the next child comes in, they have an approach which will work and be able to work to that. Because that's sometimes what happens is you end up one person holding knowledge and they then leave and then you're starting all over again. And it's not just a maths problem, but you see it more in maths.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I mean, well, one of the things also about teaching mastery is that we really try to encourage whole class teaching.
Mm.
So can you sort of think about how that links with your
Oh,
SEN
it's
ideas?
the question I always get is, what about the rest of the class? You've told me this thing for this child and brilliant, great, but what about the other, 30 odd kids in the room? And high quality, and I'm sure people will be banging the screen when I say this because I'll be frustrated, but high quality teaching and learning, it starts with an access point that everyone can access. You start from the child,
Yep.
don't you? You start from where that child knows and understands. And if that child's knowledge and skill is here, then we start from there and we build up. There's
Yep.
nothing wrong with the other kids relearning that information and having that foundation solidified again and again and again and again and again. And then it's about, either you peel the kids off the carpet. There's lots of ways to do it. I'm working in a school at the moment have got really varied needs in their class. They've probably got they're a year five class with a year one pupil in there fundamentally, a year three pupil fundamentally in there. And so what they're doing is they're starting the rest of the kids on their tables with a math starter. They're doing their input into those two children, and then they kind of swap them over
Mm.
fundamentally. And so they peel off, they take, and it's about being innovative, and it's reimagining the way you teach. Because I think as teachers, we all have the way we like to teach. I know I've got a way I
Yep.
like to teach. It's messy and it's big and it's loud and there's lots of things happening. It's not for everyone. It's not for every child. And it's up to me to adapt, not for the child to adapt. I need to change the way I teach to make it work for you.
Yeah. Okay. No. Another thing that we've seen, and I've mentioned in a previous one of these video interviews actually, there's the NCCM has started a program called Securing Foundations at Year Seven,
Mm.
and it's because particularly post COVID, it seems that there's a much longer tail of very low achievement at Key Stage Two, and secondary teachers they're not really equipped to deal with that. And so again, we're doing work there with children trying with real basic number work and things. And so again, what I always have about this is that what you don't want is to be holding children back.
Mm.
Because it's almost like it's impossible to catch up if catching up is something that's a possibility because whilst you're catching up, the rest of the class is getting further away. So
Yes.
have you got any thoughts around that?
You know what? It's whenever you get an electrician into your house or your flat or whatever, the first thing they do is talk about the last person that's been there, don't they?
Yep.
Oh, this was terrible. This wasn't done right. Da, da, da. How did they do it? What did they do? They want to know what happened first so they can build on it.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. That's the disconnect that happens when we move settings, is
Yeah.
that we have all this kind of structure from the primary school, and then we have a secondary structure which starts, but
Yeah.
we have this gap. And when
Yeah.
we're in year six and we're trying to get that child through that exam, through that SATs paper, we will get them through the SATs paper. We won't necessarily get them through the knowledge that they need.
Yeah.
We've taught to the test.
Yeah.
And you're right that the challenge for children with SEN is that they track relatively close to their peers, and that gap gets wider and wider and
Yeah.
wider because they accelerate at a different rate because their cognitive capacity is different. They
Yeah.
can take on more. It's no surprise that when we get to GCSEs and those multiple subjects turn up, that there'll be areas of interest that children do really, really well at. There'll be some, as we talked about the other day, there'll be some children who'll be amazing at maths, but they can't do geography. Their geography GCSE is over there. They're so focused on this or whatever it might be. And it is hard because you do need to do those interventions. The best schools I work in are running interventions at the right time. I think that's the other thing. They're not missing out the high quality teaching and learning in the classroom. So it's
Yeah.
finding that time, it's being flexible. What does this child need from their education? And it will be different from case to case to case. Do they need to be learning two modern languages? Probably not if we don't know fundamental maths in year seven.
Mm.
So should we focus on that? Should we withdraw from German and work on this? It's about prioritizing the time. You've only got a finite amount of time in the school. And especially for our children with SEN, it's the best access they're ever going to get. It's the best training, it's the best CPD in a sense they're ever going to get in life. And because they've got the time, they've got the expertise in the room. So we must prioritize it and not waste the time. And it's that thing of engagement versus compliance.
Yeah.
We think about trying to draw children in. I want you to engage with me. I want to pull you in, not push you to learn. Yeah, if I can get most kids to come and sit down and work with me, but if they don't want to and they're in a really bad mood, I'm not going to get a great deal of work out of this.
Mm.
Whereas if I can pull you in with something interesting, get you to want to learn, then I can catch you up. Then I can get you going quickly, and it's short and sharp interventions which
Yeah,
really have the measurable impact we look for.
yeah. So when you're advising schools about this, can you give some kind of examples of the sorts of thing that you'll be saying to help? I guess that when people are calling you in, they're doing it because they're thinking that we're not dealing with SEN as well as we want to. We need to get
Hmm.
some expert advice. I know that you work across the board, don't you? Not just in maths, but if you could frame your answer in a maths frame, that would be good.
Yeah. The old classics, the primary school where the the maths we have concepts, solid concepts we must teach these children, and we've got to get them in place before we can move on to the next thing.
Yeah,
So there's this kind of block-in, and you know how quick curriculums move. You just go boom, boom, boom. So by the time they've recognized there's an issue, we're already 3 or 4 weeks into the year,
yeah,
and we're already going, hang on a minute, this child is here, this child is here. So the thing I try and think about is don't think about differentiation, think about different.
yeah.
Think about how I can teach this child in a different way. So if I think this child is struggling with a basic mathematical concept of, you know, the oneness of one, the two-ness of two, I just don't think they actually really understand what quantity is. They understand numerals, but they don't understand quantity. What's their favorite thing in the world? It's balloons. Right, when they're all doing their free flow, I'm going to pull you in with some balloons and we're going to work together. And I'm going to get you to understand and feel the balloons. And I'm going to fill them with lots of different things and we're going to explore the quantity of it. And then we're going to tag it to the number. And then you're going to find me the numbers. And I go at it 360. So you experience it in 5 or 6 different ways. So then I'm confident that and I frame it into the lesson, frame it into the play. Um, you have you always have different things. I think it is so important to recognize where math starts from. Math starts from understanding difference and noticing difference. If we peel it right back to a PMLD, profound multiple learning disabilities maths, it is recognizing that something has changed. It's recognizing that light and following it and tracking it with our eyes. That's how math starts. So we must find that where they are on the continuum. I think another thing we struggle with is being able to assess where the child is. So I really do deep assessment onto the child, really test them out, really I'll be with them for 30, 40 minutes on lots of different things, lots of different kind of practical things. I'll see what their physical skills are like, what their attention levels are like. And that gives me a kind of a roadmap to what I can achieve in a 45-minute session when I'm then teaching them again. But a lot of it comes down to confidence of the teacher and who do they get to have these professional conversations with and who are they exploring their maths with? Do they have that local leader in maths that they can bounce ideas off of? And can that local leader nourish them with more ideas? But yeah, small group interventions are great because children learn off each other much better. It's social constructivism in action maths. It is such a good example of it because
Yeah.
children learn maths through so many different ways, and they learn it through physicality.
Yeah.
So I always have lots of things. I have things of lights, I have things of sand, anything I can think of that is their interest, and I go from there. I go from the child.
Okay, that's interesting what you said about where do you get the advice from, because it's something that we're just starting to do within the NCTM Maths Hubs now is within the Maths Hubs. The people they are coordinating professional developments across their region in maths, and the way that they deliver these professional developments is they have practicing teachers who are called local leaders of maths education, and they have some of their time is available to the Maths Hub to deploy them working with other schools and be providing expert advice and running things called work groups where they're working with teachers from multiple schools, those kinds of things. And one of the things that we're instigating for the coming year is to say within each Maths Hub we want there to be a kind of an SEN advocate.
Mm.
So somebody who, one of those local leaders of maths education who has more expertise in SEN and can really not necessarily that person working directly with schools, but that person working with the other local leaders of maths education, so that they can be able to be well, first of all, they can try to incorporate SEN into the professional development that they're giving, but
Yeah,
also that they can be a kind of a source of expertise as well, and a source of expertise which I suppose can help on one level, but can also say, if I can't answer your problem, I know I can get some information which can really
yeah,
help you.
exactly.
So I think that's definitely something that I think is a positive development. I suppose I'm thinking now, Nick, about if I'm let's say I'm teaching in Key Stage 3, and I've got there's a couple of a couple of children in my class. Maybe they, I mean, dyscalculia is something that's banded around a lot, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
and I think that most people who are teaching in school will have children who for whatever reason that they may have a label of dyscalculia. Can you say something about that?
it's an interesting one, isn't it? It doesn't really exist in SEND schools. Yeah,
Right?
I've worked in, three different SEND schools in my career, and I've never bumped into a child with dyscalculia, which I always find quite fascinating. Um, but then also, I suppose they have overriding needs, which kind of define that. I've read about the National Maths, National Maths, I think it was called. They talked about it's 4 million children in the
Yeah.
UK who've been kind of diagnosed with dyscalculia, and it's an unexpected challenge.
I think
That's the
national numeracy is what you're talking about, isn't it?
national numeracy.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
one,
yeah,
and it's an unexpected challenge in maths. And what's unexpected about it? Yeah,
yeah,
it's an I think labeling is always something that I am very cautious of, because
mm,
it can potentially put a ceiling on very quickly on a child. And I'd be more interested in how we provide an access to that child. And
mm,
if that diagnosis provides a really good couple of options on how to provide access to maths for this child, how to change the way we teach and change the environment, then I think it's got a great benefit to it. I don't think it's a barrier to learning maths, in a sense that we can still achieve amazing things with dyscalculia, just like we can still achieve amazing things in literacy with dyslexia. Yeah,
yeah,
it's just you just need to learn it differently,
yeah,
and we just need to be, as practitioners, skillful enough to and knowledgeable enough to do that.
yeah. A bit. So, yeah, that's I think perhaps a reassuring answer in a way that there is a
Doesn't
way
mean
of
you
dealing
can't
with
learn
that.
maths. Yeah. But I also understand the hesitancy that it brings in educators, because you don't not teach modern foreign languages to children who are dyslexic.
Yeah,
You still expose them to it, and you still give them a rich environment to learn in.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So, I mean, do you have I mean, I'm thinking again about I mean, what's becoming something really positive about it at the moment actually is that whilst the media and everything still claims that still seems to claim that, as a nation we don't like maths and yeah, all of those negative things. Actually, when you survey children and young people about maths, they actually don't say that. They say that they like it and they recognise it's a really important
Mm,
subject. So I guess thinking about when you're planning your maths lessons as a teacher in a mainstream school, what should you be thinking about if you know that you've got some children in your class who do struggle with maths? Now, whether that means that they are SEN or not, I'm not
mm,
sure. But
yeah,
you'll find maths attainment certainly manifests itself across a very broad spectrum, doesn't it?
yeah.
And so in most classes, you're going to have some young people that really are struggling. What would you advise we can do as maths educators to try to make sure that we're getting the best out of everybody?
The first thing I try and do when I'm working with a child who's not engaged in the subject is engage them with it. So I always think of a sensory skill that I can link to this. So whether, say, we're doing full and empty, or we're doing weighing, or we're doing number, or where I
Yeah,
will make sure there is the start of that lesson, there's a sensory input,
yeah,
whatever it may be, that can bring them in and give them some practical experience of the concept that I'm trying to teach. Because I then need to move into abstract eventually.
and is that something that the whole class is doing? Because probably
Yes,
the whole class benefits
yes,
from that.
100%. Because everyone
Yeah,
benefits from that. And then you look at those five key principles of maths, and that number. So we think about the one-to-one principle, we think about the cardinal principle, the order of relevance principle. We think really deep about how I'm going to teach those five things. And I think one of the biggest things about mastery is having a really clear objective,
yeah,
really clear that I can measure against. And it's that thing that sometimes we lack in Zen, is what am I learning today? We tend to be thinking about what they're doing, what they shouldn't be doing, and what they should be doing. So
Yeah.
whenever I'm in a class, I go, well, what should this child be doing right now? Or they should be doing their maths. Okay, well, what is their maths? Oh, it's
Yeah.
putting these shapes into this box. So right, but what actually is it then? So are they learning to recognize the shape? Are they learning to manipulate the shape? Are they
Yeah.
learning a specific shape? What are they actually learning here? Because if we don't know, it's very hard to motivate the child to engage in it. And
Yeah.
it's about focusing on what they should be doing, not what they shouldn't be doing. Because in the SEN world, for instance, and again, this perception of maths is there's a high focus on communication, because communication tends to lead to behavior. Breakdowns in communication tends to lead to behavior.
Yeah.
However, what are we communicating about? What are we learning about to communicate? Education is very, very simple. It's information gathering and information sharing, which to me is maths and telling you about my maths.
Mm. Yeah.
It's touching, feeling, tasting, smelling, pulling apart, doing all of that stuff, building, stacking, all of those schematic play skills that we have
Yeah.
growing up in kind of adolescence as we grow, and then being able to tell you, being able to express that. And we just focus a bit too much on one and not on the other, because it's kind of, I don't know. Well, you can get a speech and language therapist. There's kind of, in a sense, there's more external expertise in one than there is the other, and that's parents are more focused on that. They're not as focused on their cognition and learning. They just want them to be able to communicate, and
Yeah.
they lose that kind of the drive to learn, and they lose that knowledge, which is what's really important, which is what we have to hang on to as practitioners, to be mathematical and be knowledgeable, and how important that is.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know when again, something that was prevalent a few years ago in education was teachers, particularly primary teachers, wanting to collect evidence of what pupils had done, and so that
Mm.
they'd be taking photographs of what pupils had written in their exercise books. And I was very well. I thought what a huge amount of time that takes, and how. But I also thought that the outcome of a lesson should be something that's happening inside the child's head. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be something that's been written in their exercise book.
Mm.
I can see how I can see how perhaps particularly in SEN, I can see how it might be a temptation to not to not have the right emphasis on
Oh,
the knowledge.
it's I always find it heartbreaking watching a child working with a TA and the TA just taking photos of the child. That's not what you're there to be doing. You're there to be educating.
Hmm.
And what I would much prefer the adult to put the tablet down, put it on selfie mode and record. And that's record the interaction, that's record the learning. And then actually I as an educator can then reflect on how I interacted with the child, and I
Yeah,
can look at where the misconceptions are. But pictures don't really say enough sometimes. And all that ends up happening is in the last week of half term, there's about 1,000 photos that are done, quite staged, stuff. Because we're educators, that's kind of it's life. That's how all education works. Is we all have deadlines that we put off and put off and put off, and then
yeah,
we kind of crack on those photos for the last couple of
yeah,
days. I've
yeah,
done it, and whereas if we focus on something meaningful like a video, then we can really look at the maths and look at the way a child.
yeah,
It's funny, I was talking to a teacher the other day with a non-verbal child in a year 5 class. She asked a question to the child, and the question was about 1 plus 5. And
yeah,
she's going 1 plus 5. And she kept on saying it, kept on saying it, kept on saying it. So I kind of pulled her away. There's 3 things happening here. Either he doesn't understand what you're saying, he doesn't care what you're saying, or he's thinking. Which one of the 3 is it? And she couldn't answer that question, which is fine, fair enough. But
yeah,
like actually, that's really what's happening here. Either the question's just nowhere near pitched in the right way, or I don't care, which
yeah,
instead, why should I? It's always a question I always say to you: why should I listen to you? Children with special needs maybe don't have that inherent kind of authority complex that other children have.
yeah,
So you have that, and then you also have the actually I'm thinking, and every time you speak to me, my process starts again, and I have to keep on rethinking. And it's because it's people just wanting, and it's that difference between being busy and being engaged.
yeah,
And education can sometimes feel like a pull between both, that we end up keeping them busy and caring for them as opposed to having them engaged and focused. And that
yeah,
engaged and focused is hard. and it's tough, and there will be conflict, and there will be children not be happy, and that all of that stuff will happen if we don't do it right.
Yeah.
You know, if we engage and we teach in a really impactful and multi-sensory way. It's funny, multi-sensory education kind of in mainstream kind of stops after key stage one. Suddenly
Mm.
we just decide that children don't need these learning experiences. They absolutely do.
Mm.
You want to talk to a child about geography, take them on a geography trip. They'll tell
Yeah.
you everything about it. You know,
Yeah.
children
Mm.
take so much from a multi-sensory environment, and we need to keep nourishing
Yeah.
children with that.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I know one of the things that we, again, through the NCTM, the Teacher Mastery world, we've really encouraged more use of manipulatives in
Yes.
maths in primary school, and also and actually, why not use them in secondary school as well?
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I mean, as a maths person, I like doing maths problems and things for fun. It's part of, so I get pleasure out of doing that. When I'm doing that, I'm scribbling around and trying to make
Yeah,
myself little things
exactly.
that help me think.
Mm.
So it just seems a weird thing to me that it's almost like I mean, yeah, you want, I suppose you want to use manipulatives and things to help children understand and develop their learning, but actually they can be aids to thinking as well, not
Yeah.
just like yeah.
Yeah, they can be really powerful, learning tools, and
Mm.
I see them as learning tools. A manipulative is just the same as a ruler.
Yeah.
We don't take rulers away from children because they've measured it once. We keep giving them the ruler. You know, it's a tool to teach maths with, and I
Mm.
think we sometimes think children grow out of it. You think,
Yeah.
oh, they're old, they're too old for that now. They're definitely not.
Yeah.
I worked in environments where like I do loads of things which people think, God, the kids will hate that. Absolutely love it. They're being treated like a child sometimes, and actually sometimes it's really nice to kind of be like, you know what, we're going to get all the sand out, and we're going to do how many cups of sand. You're going to do estimations. Here's some of those little shot glasses. Estimate how many cups of sand you're going to get out of that tray. Go. Kids love it. That's proper estimation. That's a proper practical thing. And really measure on, okay, so how much is that? And then you can really get in there with that child with saying, okay, so if we picture this, let's have a look at what it would look like. And so that's probably the example for that young person, making it practical and visual. I think we rely too much on the brain holding the information constantly,
Yeah.
and actually just and verbally communicating maths, and like having it really visual makes such a difference.
Yeah. You've actually reminded me actually of something that I saw in a maths lesson again in I think in China where they were talking about weight, and so they had a kilogram of rice. This is what a kilogram of rice is. This is what it
Mm,
feels like. And that is, yeah, that you're right.
exactly.
Well, it is yeah, it's an important thing, isn't it? It
Mm.
gives a kind of a bigger, a better, deeper understanding of the concept. Yeah, definitely.
Experiences inform emotion. Emotion informs choice. You know, the experience of that maths session would have given a positive emotional response. Next time you tell me to do my maths homework, I'm going to do it. Why? Because maths is fun. Because I've experienced it in a fun way. If the subject is done in a really and there's a lot of failure and there's a lot of not getting it right, then we will withdraw from it. We naturally will. We lose that self-determination, that confidence to try.
Yeah, and I heard you also earlier talking about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, and
Yeah.
what you want to do is to trigger the intrinsic, isn't it?
To be curious, to find out more, to want to find out more. Like you said, with your maths kind of, you want to find out more. You want to have that interest. It's amazing. People, yeah, as you say, like this kind of external perspective that children don't like maths.
Mm.
Whereas if you talk to them about their favourite footballer and ask them how many goals they've scored this season,
Yeah,
they'll tell you. And you say,
yeah,
okay, so and how many games? Oh, it's this. Okay, so what percentage of goals is it per game then?
yeah,
You can get children in because they're intrinsically motivated to find out. We rely too much on do this, get that in
yeah,
SEN. And all that happens is we rush the doing to get to the play, to get to the thing, where actually this should be good enough. The lesson I'm teaching should be engaging enough so that I actually want to find out more. And then, I will have a nice choice at the end because, that's a nice thing to do. But the actual activity itself should be engaging. And I think sometimes we expect the child to engage because we told them to engage. And that's not reality. That's
yeah.
not how
No,
it
yeah,
works.
and I think with maths is that once you get to a certain level in maths, it can become something which is pleasurable in itself and wanting to
Mm.
understand more about how it works. But that's quite a long way down the educational
Yeah.
journey. So yeah, but in order to get there, you've got to, yeah. I think that those are all really sound points. Look, Nick, I mean, I don't want to keep you any longer because I know we've been talking for a long time, but I think that a reassuring thing for me about this is that some of the kind of pedagogy that the NC7 and the Maths Hubs promotes, the whole teaching mastery ideas, they seem to actually link quite well with what you're saying about how to make send SEN work, but work, yeah, be more
Absolutely.
effective. And
Yeah,
you know, the
it's
idea of going
schematic.
going more slowly, understanding things more deeply, and not rushing to get to the end all the time, but wanting to really understand the
Hmm.
process and have some deep knowledge to build from. And it's just
Mm.
how we can help children to experience that in the classroom. And I suppose another thing I'm getting from this, and it's something that I know again one of my colleagues at MEI who does lots of work with post 16 children who found maths very challenging pre 16. He's thinking about when you're designing lessons to design a lesson to well, something which again we talk about teaching mastery to make sure that the starting point is a point where you're starting with a secure foundation that the
Yeah,
children understand that they know where they're coming from, and then you can build from that. And
yeah,
you know, perhaps one of the things that's, you know, I'm always loath to say that maths is so uniquely different to other subjects, but I kind of do believe this that in this instance that it because it builds on itself all the time. If there's
yeah.
something missing somewhere, then that can be a confounding problem. And so it's really important to just make sure you're connecting back to a place of safety where they know where the people being taught are secure and build from that rather
Mm.
than kind of nipping it at a level where they're not quite sure how to get there to start with.
Yeah, it's that science of proximal development, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
exactly
being
right. Yes.
in that
Yeah.
space. It's a bit like as a old colleague of mine used an example of a fried egg.
Yeah.
You got the yolk, but we need to be able to move out from it. And when we move out into that space of kind of bit danger, we need
Yeah.
to know that we can fall back on a concept which brings us
Yeah.
back. It's a bit like I me and my partner, we're a bit obsessed with Quirkle at the moment. She's really
Okay.
good maths game, lots of counting, lots of stuff. And it's funny, like, see, when it gets quite high, like there's lots of quick maths, and I just will always write out the maths as it's happening because I just want to know that's on that, that means that, this is that, it's fine.
Yeah.
I like to
Yeah.
refer all the way back, and I like to back chain. And back chaining is such an important part of learning that I have a chain of knowledge
Mm.
which keeps me secure. It's a bit like when you're kind of you're climbing or you're on a map. When I do a lot
Yeah.
of walking, I've got a
Yeah.
charity walk coming up with my best friend Ed.
Yeah.
And when you're on that map, you're walking, you think you're getting a bit lost. You think, right, but I know that point was there, so I know I've gone past that church. So I know I can't be that lost. There is a point of reference that I can come back to,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's going to be okay. The minute we start not finding those points of reference is the time to start to panic. And that's learning. It's maths.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's that solid foundation.
Yeah. In fact, talking about zones of proximal development, all that stuff is there's stuff that we know, isn't it? But we don't
Mm,
necessarily always think about it properly.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. Anyway, real pleasure to talk to you, Nick. And I know also that we'll yeah, hopefully we'll continue to talk about how we can sort of a bit of a sore throat here, how we can kind of develop SEN in maths more. And it's something that certainly the NC7 and the maths hubs want to think about. And I think it's something that can again can one of those issues around maths is this idea that it seems it doesn't necessarily seem inclusive. And I think
mm,
if we can address that, then that'll be
yeah,
a really good thing for maths and maths education. Also, a really good thing for just people generally to help more people to be able to be to use maths effectively in work and life.
absolutely. Couldn't agree
Great.
more.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for your time, Nick. Great to
Pleasure,
talk to you.
Charlie.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
you too.
Cheers then.